Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which is one of 3 area-based planning committees of Dorset Council. Our area of remit covers the previous Purbeck District Council and most of the previous East Dorset District Council areas. For the benefit of the public, I am Councillor Tony Coombs, Chairman of this Area Planning Committee. I'm going to just do a quick introduction to the officers that will be supporting us today. We have Kim Cowell, who's Principal Planning Officer, Kari Waldridge, Planning Case Officer, Liz Adams, Planning Case Officer, Naomi Shinkins, Planning Case Officer, Peter Walters, Planning Case Officer, Colin Graham from Dorset Highways, Steve Savage, Dorset Highways. We hope Steve Horser from Environmental Health and Louise Joyner from Environmental Health. Chelsea Gollidge, who will be reading out the public representations. Phil Crowther is our legal support today, and David Northover, our committee support officer. I would also like to thank all the officers behind the scenes who are making today's virtual meeting possible. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making processes to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and Council staff in accordance with the Government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations for holding committee meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public, and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website afterwards. Public participation will take the form of written statements as opposed to public speaking. We will be following the agenda as set out in the pack, and I'll be running the meeting in 2 sessions. This morning's session will cover agenda items 1 to 6, and items 7 to 9 will be covered in the afternoon session, which is starting at 2 p.m. We have a reformed committee following annual council, and I would like to thank Beryl Ezard and Cherry Brooks for their contribution on the committee, and welcome Julie Robinson and Brian Heatley to the committee. You are both very welcome. David Northover, do I have any apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, apologies for absence received from Councillor Worth for the whole day, and Councillor Robinson for this morning's session. She will be joining us this afternoon. Okay, that's lovely. Just for clarity, to make sure that we do have everyone here that we're expecting to be here, I will do a roll call, please. So if you can just let me know that you are here. Shane Bartlett, Vice Chairman.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Alex Brenton.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Morning. Robin Cook.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Morning. Mike Dyer.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Morning. Barry Gorringe.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Morning. Brian Heatley.
Good morning, I'm here.
Morning and welcome. David Morgan.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Good morning. Julie, we have apologies from David Took.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Good morning. Bill
Morning.
Trite.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Good morning. Thank you. And John Worth, we have apologies from. So, members, do we have any declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination on the agenda today so far? You are at liberty to raise it if something becomes apparent later on during the meeting. Silence is golden. Thank you very much. Members, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of August, are you happy for me to approve or sign as a true record, and do you so approve, please?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Agreed, Madam Chairman.
Any dissent? Lovely. So as soon as I can access offices, I will go in and sign all the meetings. Public participation. Members of the public have been invited to submit written representations which are limited to 450 words. These have also been limited to 3 submissions against the proposal, 3 in support, including the applicant and the Town or Parish Council. Members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee and who wish to address the committee will be allowed to speak. All requests have to have been registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 AM on Monday the 28th of September. Bearing in mind there's only one September in any year, sorry about that. Are there any representations from the public that do not relate to matters on the agenda today, David?
No, there aren't.
Okay, so moving swiftly on then, onto the schedule of planning applications. There are 3 planning applications on the agenda. Kim, do we have any requests for deferrals or withdrawal, please?
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Yes, we do. Agenda item number 6, page 55, application 320499 for the erection of a multi-use games area at St Ives Primary and Nursery School, Sandy Lane, St Leonard's. That there is a request that application be deferred from the committee meeting and in order to assess the relationship between the games area and trees on site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So in light of that, unfortunately, because of the public notification of the afternoon meeting, we will not be able to bring forward the business of the afternoon session. So once we have dealt with the other application for this morning, which is the Old Malt House in Langton Travers, we will then have an extended break until 2 PM, and I look forward to seeing members back again at 2 o'clock. So background information relating to the planning applications before us today has been available for inspection by members prior to the meeting, covering consultations, objections and representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policies. For each item on the agenda, I will invite the case officer to introduce their item. Members of the public, planning agents, applicants and town and parish councils have been invited to make their written submissions, and these will be read out by Chelsea Gollage, who has not been involved with the merits of either of the applications, but only in providing technical support. These will be read out in the following order: public against the application, public in support, the applicant or agent, town and parish council, and then any local member participation. Following the public participation section of every item, I will ask the officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. I will then open up the debate for members. And in order to facilitate the meeting, may I request that members of the committee direct any remarks or questions through myself, and I will invite you to speak in turn. Requests to speak need to be made via the chat facility. Can I remind members again that the chat facility is for the smooth running of the meeting only and not to be used for discussion on the merits of the application. Please can you keep your microphones on mute when not speaking to maintain audio quality, and the same for video, please. At the end of the debate, for transparency, I will take the vote by roll call. The vote details will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or more members make the necessary request in advance of the vote, i.e. a recorded vote. I will also ask members to confirm that they have heard the entire presentation and debate before they cast their vote. So we will now move on to the first of the applications, and due to the technology there may be a short gap while the presentation is loaded. So the first item that we are dealing with today is agenda item 5 on pages 11 to 54 of your agenda, 62019-0604, redevelopment of the site including demolition of several school buildings, conversion and construction of new buildings to provide 19 dwellings with vehicular access, off-street parking, gardens and landscaping, the Old Malt House, High Street, Langton Travers. And Kari Waldridge, you're going to be taking us through this one, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, can we have the presentation loaded, please?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to introduce
Claire.
myself. My name is Kerry Waldridge and I am the Planning Officer and the Case Officer for the current application. So the application before you now is for the redevelopment of the old Malthouse site in Langton-Matravers. This includes the demolition of several school buildings and the conversion of an older building to provide for 19 new dwellings, a vehicular access of Old Malthouse Lane, gardens, parking, waste storage facilities and hard and soft landscaping. A summary of the full mix of housing is provided on page 13 of your report, and it includes 1 bungalow, 9 houses and 9 apartments. Redevelopment of this site has been subject of extensive pre-application advice with both the planning officers and conservation officers. So the application site itself is located in the village of Langton-Matravers in the former Purbeck area. The village is a local service village and is located approximately 2.5 miles from Swanage, the nearest town and retail centre. The application site is located close to the centre of the village and is surrounded by a mix of residential development, the village primary school, which is next door, and former Old Malthouse School playing fields located to the north of the site. To the south and southeast of the site is a village play area, recreation ground, and also the site is within the conservation area, which you can just see is the red outline here. The entire site is also within the Dorset AONB, which is shown by the orange hatch, and there is a group tree preservation order over the site. As you can see from this side, the application site is outlined with a red boundary, and a blue boundary shows the remainder of the land within the applicant's ownership, including the extensive area of playing fields to the north of the current site. So just to give members some context for the site, these photos here, A and B, are looking towards High Street in the village centre from the northern part of Old Malthouse Lane. Members will see the Old Malthouse Lane here and existing buildings on the site to the left of the lane here. Photograph C is taken from High Street looking eastwards as you travel towards Swanage. The building at the front here forms part of the application site, and the remainder of the buildings along High Street have already been sold off separately and are residential dwellings. And then photograph D is looking northwards along Old Malthouse Lane from High Street, and you can see the existing buildings that form part of the former Old Malthouse School here on the right hand side. So some further context, so this building here fronts onto High Street. This is part of the proposed conversion. Photograph B here is a view along the northern boundary of the site, so looking past some of the existing more modern school buildings here towards existing residential development at a higher level on Old Malthouse Lane. And then photograph C here, this is looking from the site northwards across the playing fields, and as you can see there are quite extensive views towards Purbeck Ridge. Photograph D, this is looking southwards towards High Street, and you can see here some of the more modern school buildings, so the school hall and classrooms here. And again, just some further photographs for context. So these photographs are all taken within the site. These buildings here in A, and then you can see in the distance here B. They are existing buildings that are either to be converted or demolished as part of the current application. And they formerly provided the offices and dormitories in the Old Malthouse School, and then its more recent use as a residential education centre. This building here is one of the more modern buildings, the school hall, and looking in the distance we have the existing storage building, which is proposed to be moved as part of the current application to provide waste bin storage. Again, photograph D shows the existing storage building and some of the car parking currently on the site. And photograph C here, this is taken from the side of the existing school hall, looking towards Old Malthouse Lane, with the residential development in the background. And as you can see, there's quite a significant drop here from the lane down into the site. So the majority of the application site is within the settlement boundary of Langton Travers and is classed as brownfield land. There is a small area of the site to the north here, which is located outside of the settlement boundary. And whilst parking provision is proposed here, no new buildings are proposed within the countryside. Officers therefore consider that the principle of the proposed development is acceptable. Officers have considered whether there is a loss of a community facility. However, due to the previous private business use of the premises, firstly as an independent school and secondly as a private residential outward bound centre, officers don't consider there is a loss of a community facility. Full details of this assessment are set out on page 30 of your report. A number of objections have been raised by residents and the Parish Council to the application, and these will be covered throughout the remainder of the presentation. The proposed site plan here, as you can see, the outline of the site is in red. Members may also be able to see the red outlines within the site, which shows the location of the existing buildings. So these include the dormitory and office buildings, the school hall, classrooms here and the small storage buildings. These existing buildings on the site provide a vacant building credit, and this means that no affordable housing provision can be required as part of the application in accordance with national guidance and framework. Full detail in this respect is set out on pages 30 to 32 of your report. The Parish Council have raised objections in this respect. However, officers consider the assessment submitted as part of the current application is in accordance with national guidance. The proposed access will remain where it is as existing, but will be widened as part of the current application. So just to give you an idea in terms of the development within the site, sorry, apologies. The building here at the bottom in the dark grey is proposed to remain as it is and be converted into 2 apartments. And then the light grey buildings here that you can see outlined form the new build elements of the scheme with a frontage along Old Malthouse Lane that will be non-domestic, but will respect the original function of the buildings here, and then a more modern contemporary style of development to the north and within the site, within the courtyard. So the first, I will quickly go through now the layout and elevation plans just to give members an idea of what's proposed. So the first units proposed are here within the existing building on the site, and this is the conversion of the existing buildings into 2 apartments. These are here and here, and then it's worth pointing out to members that due to the site levels, the development moves northwards and into the site, becoming 2-storey and then 3-storey and then dropping down again. So units 2 to 11 here consist of a group of 1 house and 9 apartments. As you can see from the layout plans, we have the 3 different levels, and the lower ground floor level is possible due to the drop in site levels. Units 2 to 3 are proposed to be conversions to apartments within the existing buildings. A number of minor alterations are proposed, including the addition of a small window. However, officers consider that these are acceptable. Unit 4 in the centre here is a terraced house, and then the remainder are apartments. And so here is an indication of the elevation. So the first elevation here is along Old Malthouse Lane. Now it's worth pointing out that officers, both planning and design and conservation, have worked very closely with the applicants on this elevation within the conservation area to ensure that the height of the elevations are reduced so that they are no worse than existing, and also to ensure the setback is as close to as existing as possible. This elevation, as I have already pointed out, differs to the more contemporary nature in the remainder of the sites, and it was considered it was essential to retain the commercial and historic brewery function of these buildings along Old Malthouse Lane. It's also worth pointing out, as we received many objections from the parish and neighbours, that when the existing buildings here are demolished to make way for the new development, the diamond style windows will be retained and reused in the new elevations here and as we move along the access road into the site. So again, these elevations just provide you with an idea of how the design alters within the site from the traditional along Old Malthouse Lane to a more contemporary design in the courtyard. And as you can see here, elevation D just shows how the height of the development will go from 2-storey down into 3-storey and then back down into 2-storey, which reflects the site levels within the site. So as we move into the courtyard development, these properties have a much more contemporary design, but they continue to reflect the use of traditional materials within the village and the conservation area. So the next property, apologies, is here. This is a bungalow that will be set into the height level differences along Old Malthouse Lane. And as you can see from both the elevations and the floor layout plan, this is much more modern and contemporary with the use of angled windows and very large windows here to allow sufficient light and also to ensure there's no overlooking or outlook of neighbouring properties. All of these properties have a private garden, and as you can see here, it's enclosed by a Purbeck stone wall. And I'll just move quickly around through the elevations for members' interest. So next we have a detached house. This is a 3-bed detached, unit 13. Again, you will see the modern design and use of interest in the dwellings with a small garden and a separate garden office room here. And just to give you some information on the elevations, these are also very contemporary. They include the use of local materials, in particular Purbeck stone. And before I go through the remaining elevations, the applicants have provided us with some information, further information on the individual design. So I'll share that with you so you have a sense of the general character of the proposal before we move through the remaining elevations and layouts in quick succession. So as you can see, the elevations and the design includes the use of ridge lights in the roof, and they've provided 2 different examples of how this can look. Members may also have noticed that the guttering in a number of the properties is concealed, and this picture here and here shows how this actually works with the concealed guttering as opposed to guttering on the actual front of the properties. A number of properties also have guttering that crosses the eaves of the roofs on windows, and the applicants have given us an example of how this is used elsewhere within the Purbeck area, quite traditionally, and this particular example is in Corfe Castle. So just moving through the remainder of the layout plans and elevations. So the next is a pair of 2 semi-detached houses, 2-bedroom houses. Again, very similar layout with gardens and very similar contemporary design. And you will see the use here of some of the guttering that is concealed, just to point that out to members. The next pair of dwellings, these are 2 3-bedroomed houses, again very similar layout and design, and there we go with the elevations, and here you can see where the use of the guttering crosses the windows, as is in the traditional form on many properties in the Purbecks. A further pair of semi-detached properties, again these are 3 beds, and there's the elevations. And then finally, we have a 3-bedroom detached house. Again, very similar design, a small garden room included, enclosed garden with gateways. And as you can see, all of the amenity areas are proposed to be enclosed with Purbeck stone walling and traditional gate access. So moving on now to the proposed bin store. There is an existing store on the site which members will have seen in the photographs earlier. It's proposed to move this further northwards to provide sufficient capacity for bin storage within the development. So this will be communal area and it will provide capacity for all recycling, general waste and food waste. And the provision that has been provided is in accordance with Dorset Council guidance for new developments. Neighbours throughout the application have raised concerns about the bin store, in particular the noise, smells and visual impacts. The location of the bin store and its design has altered to try and address these comments as far as possible. So now only high-level windows are proposed on the Old Malthouse Lane elevation and access is off the side of the bin store. So if I can just explain to members, most people within the site will bring their bins up the access road, around the wall here and then down into the side access. So this has hopefully addressed as many of the neighbour concerns as possible. And these elevations just show how the bin store will work. So the bin store is built on the higher level on Old Malthouse Lane. And as you can see, the side access here around the wall and into the side door here. But for members' information, due to the site levels, we have got some proposed carport car parking under the bin store to serve the dwellings. And you can see here where the site levels allow for this within the site. The bin store will be looked after by a management company and this has been conferred by the applicants. Dorset Waste Partnership already access a number of properties at the end of Old Malthouse Lane to the north and so there is ability there for them to stop and access the bin store in this location. Okay, so officers have looked at the relationship of the new development and the conversion with the existing properties along Old Malthouse Lane here. Given the previous uses of the property, first as an independent school, where we had a number of dormitories here at both first and second floor level, and then more recently as a residential outward bound centre, officers consider that the plans that we have in front of us now are acceptable in terms of loss of amenity. It's not considered that there will be any significantly additional harmful impact in terms of loss of privacy between the neighbouring properties than was previously experienced or could continue to be experienced with the lawful use of the site. Within the site itself, the unusual layout and the design of the properties means that impacts are acceptable and there's minimal harmful overlooking between the properties. So just moving on to some cross sections now to give members an idea of how the proposed development will look. The key elevation really is along Old Malthouse Lane and officers have worked hard with the applicants to ensure that this is considered to be acceptable. So you will see the top elevation here. This is as existing along Old Malthouse Lane and you can see here the area of the buildings that are proposed to be retained and converted, and then here the area of the buildings that are proposed to be demolished, and you can see the 3-storey element which included dormitories up here. And then below, as you can see, the applicants have provided us with an indication of how the height of the buildings will differ. And there is minimal difference. In fact, the proposed development here is much more domestic in scale, whilst retaining the sort of more industrial commercial character from the original brewery function of the site. Here you can see where the existing store building is proposed to be moved, and this is to be the bin store with the 2 high-level windows I referred to earlier. And then further within the site here, you can see the outline of the existing sports hall, and then just in the distance, the proposed detached house and the very top of the proposed bungalow here. So given the alterations that have been made to the scheme, officers consider that the proposal is currently acceptable and there are no outstanding objections from the Design and Conservation Officer or the Planning Officer in terms of scale, design and impact on the character and appearance of the area. It is also considered that harm to the conservation area will be less than substantial and that this is outweighed by the overall benefits of the scheme, including the redevelopment of a brownfield site within a local service village. Just some further cross sections for the benefits of members here. So this is east to west across the site. Again, the top is existing, and below you can see where the new buildings are proposed in comparison to existing, being outlined in red. And here you can just see where the proposed bin store is, with the car parking below, accessed from within the site. So in terms of landscaping, details of both soft and hard landscaping have been submitted and have been considered acceptable, subject to conditions as set out in the committee report. A range of materials are proposed to be used in the hard landscaping, particularly in these courtyard areas, as you can see, and also to define a pedestrian walkway along Old Malthouse Lane. This includes the use of quite traditional materials, including flagstones, cobble rumble strips, and compressed gravel. In terms of soft landscaping, 3 moderate quality trees are to be retained within the site, including this larger tree within the centre of the site here. 8 trees are proposed to be removed. However, additional planting of 17 structural trees is proposed. This is set out in a arboricultural method statement, which has been approved by the council's tree officer. A condition is recommended on the decision requiring future details of planting to be improved, and this includes a planting plan, species and density of planting. Neighbours have raised concerns about the level of car parking provision within the site in these courtyards here. However, the assessment and the provision meets Dorset Council parking guidance in terms of both allocated, unallocated and visitor parking. The site layout also proposes 3 allocated parking spaces in this part of the car parking court for the existing properties on High Street that have been separately sold and don't form part of the current application. It's just worth pointing out again the parking at the north here. As I mentioned before, whilst this is outside the settlement boundary, there is existing informal parking along this stretch of the lane already, and as no buildings are proposed, officers consider that this provision is acceptable in the countryside. So the applicants have provided some illustrative details of the proposed scheme for members to consider at committee. This includes some views of how the proposal will look, some details of the materials, as you will see here, and also similar style developments within the Purbeck area to how the proposed is to look. And here I've just provided one of the illustrative views in more detail, so you have an idea of how the proposals to look within one of the courtyards of the scheme. So moving back to the site itself, there are a number of other issues which have been addressed as part of the application. These include impacts on neighbours. We have received a number of objections in terms of the noise, dust, vibrations, deliveries, etc. that will result from the proposed development. The Parish Council and neighbours have requested a construction environment management plan, and members will see this has been conditioned for future approval together with a construction transport management plan. Neighbours and parish have also raised objections regarding highway safety, particularly where the lane narrows here, and also where we have a private parking lay-by to the front of the properties here. Concerns are also being raised regarding the site access and the junction of Old Malthouse Lane with High Street down here. There are no outstanding objections in terms of highway safety. Officers have undertaken an assessment of impact, particularly in terms of traffic movements to the site, and it is considered that traffic movements as a result of this development would not be considerably worse than that which could take place with the current lawful use and the previous lawful use as an independent school. Finally, in terms of other issues, the Parish Council have requested that a second homes condition is applied to any decision on the site. However, members will be aware that in terms of the emerging local plan policies relating both to second homes and contributions towards transport infrastructure, following a recent appeal decision, officers are unable to recommend that any weight is given to these policies in the determination of the current application. More detail is set out in paragraphs 1566 to 1569 of your report. So in summary, officers considered that the principle of the development is acceptable. The site is previously developed and the majority of it is within the settlement boundary. The vacant building credit assessment is in accordance with national guidance, and the provision of no affordable housing is considered acceptable in this instance. The impact of the development on the conservation area is considered to be acceptable, subject to details required by condition. The scale, design and impact on the character and appearance of the area is also considered to be acceptable, again subject to details of materials details of materials by condition. The impact on the OMB is acceptable and there are no objections from the OMB officer. The impact upon the living conditions of the neighbouring properties is also considered to be acceptable, subject to conditions. Tree impacts, as already discussed, are acceptable, subject to condition requiring implementation of the arboricultural method statement and a detailed planting plan. Biodiversity impacts are acceptable. A biodiversity mitigation plan has been submitted and approved by Dorset Council Natural Environment Team. Appropriate assessment and EIA screening has been undertaken. So highway safety, car parking and impacts on the numerous nearby public rights of way are also considered acceptable, again subject to conditions and informative notes on the decision. Flood risk and drainage is acceptable, subject to condition. Waste service provision is considered to be acceptable in accordance with the Council's guidelines. And as already pointed out, second homes and infrastructure contributions. In this case, officers consider that the emerging policies cannot be given significant weight at this time. So all significant planning matters have been appropriately or adequately addressed, and officers are recommending approval, subject to informative notes and conditions as set out in the committee report. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Gary. That certainly is a comprehensive presentation. We're now going to move on to the public representations. Chelsea, do you want to take us through those with the public objecting first?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. The first comment is from Martin Barnett, who objects to the application. Whilst I have concerns about the number of properties squeezed into the development site, my main concerns about the submitted plans fall into four main areas as follows. Bin store. The siting of a communal bin store on Old Malthouse Lane will be hazardous to OHL and new property residents alike. Additionally, the proposed store fails to provide for Mallow Sapphire and Sea Pink cottages who currently leave their bins in Old Malthouse Lane. The obvious solution is to allow each property to be responsible for its own refuse, as in Old Malthouse Lane, and have individual collection, or failing that, to have a communal store in a more central location. 2. Vehicle access to development. The submitted drawings do not appear to accurately reflect the land owned by number 3 Old Malthouse Lane, which is opposite the entrance to the development. It merely shows one car parked at the end of their parking space, whereas they could legally park 2 cars outside their property, thus reducing the width of access to the development. With reference to the swept path drawing, the estate car dimensions which have been used do not reflect the dimensions of many cars. The quoted width of 1.804 metres is surely an understatement when my modest Ford Focus is 2.04 metres from wingtip to wingtip. Irrespective of the above, if one overlays the optimistic drawings, they clearly show that 2 cars, let alone 2 vans, cannot pass each other at the entrance to the development or further down the access road. This will clearly represent a serious and unacceptable hazard with vehicles having to reverse blind into Old Malthouse Lane. The road needs to be wide enough to allow for vehicles to pass and emergency vehicles and refuse vehicles, ref the above, to manoeuvre on site. Number 3. Junction of Old Malthouse Lane and High Street. This junction is currently dangerous due to limited sight lines and volume of traffic, particularly at school opening and closing times when Old Malthouse Lane is often used by parents. This can only become more hazardous with another 19 properties plus 3 cottages using Old Malthouse Lane once construction is complete, let alone during the construction phase, leading on to number 4, construction management plan. In my experience, before approval, any such development must submit a construction management plan detailing traffic management, material storage, post-development restoration, etc., etc. To date, I have not seen a plan. The next comment is from Lee Merrick, who objects. People locally support a redevelopment of a reasonable scale, proportion and impact within the existing settlement boundary, alongside but not in the AOB and conservation area. We and many others do as well. They value the National Planning Policy Framework, adopted locally too in the PLP and draft successor, to protect and enhance Dorset's outstanding natural environment. They know that new housing range of need in Langton is massively exceeded by this application and others in train now. Need is not the driver here. People were disturbed by the current picture at the Old Malthouse Lane junction, which is chaos at peak periods and ranked dangerous to turn out of otherwise. Add 150 to 200 extra vehicular movements a day, if indeed the new houses become permanently occupied, and the consequence is a serious safety threat. The usable current lane width, too, will not allow passage of 2 cars side by side in the first 100 metres or so, nor with high street parking up to the junction itself can you turn onto with safe vision, especially to the right. Display is lethally inadequate and raised over the decades as unnecessarily threatening. So it is no surprise that the current enclave around Old Malthouse Lane estate is concerned that the consequences of the scale of the applicant's proposal about what could be left behind and how it is managed. This matters. Motorhomes, caravans, cars under repair, boats in an AOB and increase in junction danger onto the high street. It will take more imagination and less experience than I have to believe the applicant's management company will control all. There is surely no need to breach the SB and sully the AOB and conservation area, let alone the MPPF and PLP. It does no credit to any of the parties involved to breach and expand the SB, as proposed, create traffic congestion on a single track lane, which doubles as an increasingly well-used Pam Purbeck OS listed right-of-way public footpath, with arguably one of the finest views in England. Why do we have a national planning policy framework signed up to by the HMG and regional authority? It surely begs the question, what are we trying to achieve here? May we suggest a modest trimming of ambition so that the consequences of the application are contained exclusively and totally within the current SB, with all parking spaces and bins beside the houses they belong to and access to the new enclave configured to enable two-way traffic as far as this entrance. Finally, it is disappointing to note on junction traffic that no official has contacted those residents who wrote in December 2019 about the danger, but also with a possible solution, having commissioned an independent highways consultant from Outwards Dorset. This remains available. There is a way through this by sensible compromise, which recognises a midway path between need and want, which is the real nub of the issue. Stay within the SB, place householders' assets beside the house, widen the lane and ensure legal no parking displays up and down the high street are in place. This is surely what should turn this to a green light. The applicant can do this. The next comment is from Alan Sewell, who also objects. We are concerned that the safety issues around the entrance to the proposed bin store have been ignored and that the highways input has ignored the ownership of the land in the lane. Para 15.20 notes, concern has been expressed over the design of the bin store. Our point is about safety. Para 15.24 notes that movement of the bin store has addressed neighbour concerns in relation to access from Old Malthouse Lane. This is not correct. We remain adamant that pedestrian safety will be an issue in the revised proposal. The pictures below of vehicles in Old Malthouse Lane highlight the concern of many residents about pedestrian safety. If the recycling bin store location and direct access to the lane remain as proposed, hopefully a picture is worth 1,000 words. The lane is frequently used by children from the local school, walkers and residents. Using the picture of the 2 cars parked in the lane, the gap between the vehicles and the proposed recycling bin store is 12 foot 6 inches or 381 centimetres and 13 foot 6 inches or 414 centimetres. Mr Barnett, ourselves and other residents have and still questioned the accuracy of the swept path analysis referenced in paras 15.50 and 15.53. Despite this, highways have relied on the consultant's analysis in spite of several written communications from residents highlighting that the swept path analysis is inaccurate. The officer's report, para 15.49, further demonstrates that inaccurate information is used as it notes the wrong location of private parking spaces in the lane. As Robin Hildreth of Dorset Waste Partnership was unavailable, I spoke with Mike Haynes, his manager, to ascertain if they have had any response re the proposed capacity of the recycling bin store as per the consultation input, and I still await an answer. This was communicated to Dorset Planning. No update to the consultation has been recorded on the planning website. Residents in the parish council remain concerned about the capacity of the proposed bin store, and yet the planners have imposed a condition to use waste bin requirements 18-1004/BR01. What is this condition and how has it been consulted on? We are concerned that pre-application advice and negotiation, para 7.4, between planners and the developers did not take account of neighbour/local parish council input. Indeed, local input appears to have no place in this process, a very concerning issue. E.g., Parish Council Summary Para 7, which highlights that bin store pedestrian entrance exit will be at the narrowest point in the lane and that the plans and the subsequent swept path analysis do not accurately show the facts and potential safety issues. We do not understand why the bins of Mallow, Samphire and Sea Pink cottages already occupied on the site are not included in the bin store and capacity calculations. Has account of these bins and pedestrian activity been taken into consideration? It is most disappointing that environmental concerns ref para 15.56 and 57 have been disregarded by the planners. We should be insisting on cycle parking, electric car charging points, etc. for the future of all our children and grandchildren. We support the very many neighbours' comments about safety at the junction of the lane and High Street and the need for a detailed construction management plan. We are not against the development, but would ask that the site of the proposed bin store be modified to a more suitable, safer location from the narrowest point, away from the narrowest point in the lane and contained within the site. The next comment is from Helen Wemyss, who is the head of St George's Primary School. St George's CVA Primary School has been at the heart of the village of Langton and Travers for as long as the village has been in existence, being the third or fourth oldest building in the village. The health of a school is a good indicator of the health and sustainability of a community. Whilst the school has indeed modernised in recent times, changing from a first to a primary school as part of the Purbeck Review, its future relies on having children to attend. In bygone times, quarrying and farming meant that families lived and worked in Langton and surrounding areas and their children attended the local school. As demographics have changed, with a lack of new housing in the area, coupled with a drop in birth rate, the number of local children living within the catchment area of St George's has significantly reduced. Our current intake numbers are as follows. Our PAN, published admission number, is 15 intake in reception as of September 2019. So times 7 year groups at 15 pupils equals 105 average capacity. Numbers in the school 2019 to 20. In reception there was 6, year 1 there was 9, year 2 there was 16, year 3 18, year 4 there was 10, year 5 11 and year 6 15, leaving an 85 total of pupils. Total number of pupils that were living in the catchment area was 36% and total number of pupils living outside the catchment area was 64%. Numbers currently in the school of the year 2020 to 2021 to be confirmed at the October census. In reception there's 12, year 1 there's 5, year 2 there's 11, year 3 there's 17, year 4 there's 18, year 5 there's 10 and year 6 there's 11, giving an 84 total. Currently our school is 20% before its stated PAN capacity, with approximately 2/3 of pupils originating outside the catchment area. Our goal is to maintain a thriving and viable school for future generations. The best way to do this is to have more families from a variety of socio-economic backgrounds living in the village and catchment area. We generally support the principle of providing more housing in the village with an emphasis on providing suitable homes for families, including a variety of sizes, styles and sizes of accommodation. The Spyways development, for instance, is also a welcome affordable development for future local families. Old Malt House in various guises has been supportive of our school over the years, providing additional parking for staff and providing play areas for children attending St George's premises on their land. We have an ongoing and friendly relationship with the current owners, who have continued to be supportive of St George's CVA Primary School and have agreed to maintain these arrangements for us, with the goal to provide us with a more permanent solution at some point in the future. The next comment is from Kat Birder, who's the agent for the application. Good morning, members. Thank you for this opportunity to make a representation. I am speaking on behalf of the applicants in support to the development. I hope you have received a letter from me and information from our architect. We have worked closely with the Planning Officer, Carrie Waldridge, as well as your Design and Conservation Officer, to ensure a policy-compliant development for your consideration. This is a previously developed site within the village. The site lies entirely within the village boundary, apart from part of an area of existing private car parking, part of which is included within the application site. No buildings are proposed on this land that will remain as existing. The proposed development represents a conversion and replacement of existing built floor area, a reduction in built development. We have reduced the scheme to 19 units from the initially proposed 20. This allowed a better solution for the provision of a bin store with access from the site as well as other improvements. We have followed the advice of officers and have guarded against a pastiche approach from the courtyard area, although this is designed sensitively using local materials. The old Malthouse Lane elevation has been treated differently to complement the existing building to be retained, including reusing the traditional diamond windows that are part of the character of this part of the village. We have needed to ensure that the proposed development enhances and preserves the character of the conservation area and have achieved the support of the Conservation and Design Officer following detailed revisions to meet his strict design requirements. Overall, there is a proposed reduction in the amount of development on the site, and particularly against the boundary with the open area to the rear of the site, where more recently constructed bulky school buildings are proposed to be removed. The Dorset AONB officer has reviewed our landscape and visual impact assessment, as well as potential for new landscaping. They are content that the proposal is compliant with the AONB management plan objectives and policies. We have ensured that the relationships between the neighbours on the opposite side of Old Malthouse Lane and the site are protected. With greater separation and a building lower in height, we've also amended the access and checked to make sure that the residential laybys on the lane will be unhampered by the proposal. Your Plan Officer's report sets out a very thorough assessment. We hope that you will follow the officer recommendation and grant planning permission for this proposed development that has been carefully designed to make efficient and sensitive use of this brownfield site to provide new village housing. Thank you. The next comment is from Dr. Mary Sparks on behalf of the Langton-Matravers Parish Council. Langton-Matravers Parish Council objects to this application on the following grounds. Local, strategic and national planning policies and policies in the development plan. The vacant building credit policy avoids offering affordable housing. This policy does not apply to this development because the buildings are abandoned rather than vacant. The parking area to the north is outside the settlement boundary, triggering a requirement for affordable housing under the Purbeck Local Plan 2012. The MPPF 2019 promotes sustainability for communities. Para 77 states in rural areas, planning policies and decisions should be responsive to local circumstances and support housing developments that reflect local needs. This development does not, as the main need is for affordable homes. Purbeck Local Plan. All dwellings should be all subject to the second homes policy. The development plans do not reflect this at present. Highway issues. Transport generation. The transport statement incorrectly states traffic volume. The statement is based on 20 dwellings, whereas there are 3 additional cottages fronting High Street, plus 2 dwellings which will also use the lane as part of the redeveloped science block. Total traffic movement should be based on 25 and not 20. Vehicular access on the B3069. The visibility display to the B3069 is inadequate. Traffic speed data on the B3069 is from 2008. Speeds will not necessarily remain constant. The development will result in overspill parking on the B3069 near the Old Malthouse Lane junction, close to the village school and on a narrow part of the High Street, which is effectively single lane through much of its length. Vehicular and pedestrian movement and safety in Old Malthouse Lane. Despite revisions, there are still concerns about spatial allowance for the established parking and access to residents' parking on the west side of Old Malthouse Lane and pedestrian access. There is insufficient space for a turning area to the north of the development. The application requires more robust vehicle impact assessment and traffic management plan. Adverse impact on nature conservation interests and biodiversity. The demolition of buildings which are long-standing bat, swift and house martin roosts will be detrimental to these populations. Effect on conservation area, density, visual appearance, design. The development will negatively affect the Langton-Matravers conservation area. insofar as the density is much too high. Construction management statement. Developers must provide a construction management statement indicating how noise, pollution, vehicle movements and other matters will be managed and mitigated during the construction phase and how vehicle movements will be coordinated with contemporaneous developments. Environmentally friendly development. Plans should include solar panels, ground air source heat pumps or other types of carbon neutral design throughout. That's all the comments. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Again, that was quite a marathon. Well done. We have local ward member Cherry Brooks in the meeting this morning. Cherry, do you wish to address the committee?
Yes, I do, please, if that's okay. Just very briefly, I think there's
fine. Carry on.
Sorry, can you not see me? Just to say that I think from speaking to people in the village that the development is not objected to per se. I think they just want to have the details correct, and I think the main concern, I think the bin store is actually, in my view, is the right thing to do, because in some of our new developments that haven't had bin stores, there's been more trouble with bins flying around in the wind and upsetting the neighbours, and it's quite close to the main high street. But I think it's a case of getting the detail right as far as the local residents are concerned. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, are there any issues that have been raised that you want to pick up at this stage before I go into the member debate?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. There were just a couple of issues. A number of the residents have raised the concern that we require a construction environment management plan, and I just wanted to point out to members that this and a construction transport management plan are conditioned, so conditions 4 and 5 if the application was to be approved. In terms of the safety of the bin store, I understand the residents still have concerns that pedestrians accessing the bin store will be at a risk of highway safety along Old Malt House Lane. I just think it's key to point out that the access has been altered from the frontage onto Old Malt House Lane to the side elevation. So any residents accessing that bin store shouldn't need to actually be on Old Malt House Lane when they're taking their waste up to the communal bin storage area. There was a comment about consultation with the community. Obviously, officers do support that where possible, but it's not necessary before the submission of a planning application. So just to point that out. There were comments raised about cycle parking provision. As you will note, there are a number of houses with private amenity space where they could have their own cycle parking provision within a shed. So that is sufficient for them. In terms of actual requirements for the apartments, the council doesn't have any specific cycle parking requirements, so it wouldn't have been seen reasonable to require that as part of the scheme. And then finally, in terms of the requirement for electric charging points, again, very similar. Whilst we obviously as officers encourage applicants to include electric charging points, renewable energy as part of the scheme, at present we don't have a policy that will allow us to specifically require it, and we would be seen to be unreasonable if we were to do so. And then I think finally it was just going back to the definition of whether the building has been abandoned in terms of the vacant building credit. I just wanted to point out to members that an assessment has been made in the committee report, so page 32, paragraphs 1511 and 1512, in terms of the criteria whereby you can determine if a building has been abandoned. And in this case, given the last use of the building back in 2018 and the ongoing pre-application inquiries from that stage onward, officers don't consider the building has been abandoned, and therefore the assessment has been made on that basis. And I think that was it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. My first speaker this morning is Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you to the officer for a very informative and comprehensive report. In terms of this application, reading the report, the principle of development is acceptable in accordance with the NPPF document. Impact on the AONB is acceptable. Development, from what I can see, is sympathetic to the design and the materials and construction to the local area. And I read that the applicant has received advice from planning officers and conservation officers to try and bring forward the best possible outcome for this redevelopment site, which is good to hear. There's been no objection from Historic England or from Highways, and officers have determined that there is no loss of a community asset, which in terms of sustainable developments within local communities is a very important factor. So with no objection from rights of way subject to the conditions while construction is taking place, I read in the report, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I am minded to be predisposed to this, subject to the debate that's going to take place. On page 21, the Dorset Council Waste Partnership raised a concern, which has now been resolved with, I think, what's quite possibly the most elaborate bin store I think I've ever seen, which is quite a feat of engineering construction in its own right. But the concern I do have is from page 41 and 42, concerning flood risk and surface water drainage. It's a complicated site, obviously, and there's needed to be extensive discussions with the various parties involved to resolve the issues that there are. And while reading the report, the officers are satisfied with the water authorities and the developer in terms of the agreement they've come to, in accordance with the planning conditions that are laid out, will resolve any flooding risk. I'm not sure whether this fits in with a 1 in 100 year or 1 in 1,000 year flood risk. And on page 42 at 15.62, the local lead flood authority says that they have withdrawn their holding objection. But I would just like to know whether the officers are absolutely certain that they're happy with the proposed implementations that will go into the site to reduce any risk of flooding, please. Sorry, I'm Chair, that's me finished.
Okay, Carrie, do you want to respond to any of the comments that have been made?
And I think it's fair to say that obviously the local lead flood authority did raise a holding objection, and that was really subject to a response from Wessex Water. And given that response was received, they are now happy that any flood risk relating to surface water drainage can be adequately resolved, and therefore the two conditions are recommended by officers to ensure that's fully dealt with before the site progresses.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman.
You.
Okay, thank you both. My next speaker is Robin Cook.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mine's a question, really, and when I get the answer to it, can I reserve the right to come back further in the debate, please? We had a very clear explanation, and thank you to the officer for that, but I might have missed it. But if not, I'm a bit confused about the area outside the settlement boundary, where the car parking is at the top of the screen at the slide we're looking at. That presumably, you said, I think you said it was available for parking. Vehicles were already parked there, generally from other properties and other places. Now, am I to understand that will still apply, or is this being reserved exclusively for the development? And if that's the case, how will that be managed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as you were right, that's the area up to the north here is outside the settlement boundary, and at the moment it is an area of hard standing where a number of vehicles park. I presume that they are visitors or residents of the nearby properties, and the parking would no doubt have been used as part of the previous uses of the site. The parking, as with the bin store, will be managed by a management company, which is quite standard with these types of developments. And I presume they will provide some sort of allocated parking in terms of marking out the spaces and erecting signage to confirm that they are private spaces associated with the development only. But as you can see from the red line here, the entire site, including most of the land on Malthouse Lane, is within the ownership of the applicants, and so I suppose effectively nobody has the right to park here other than the applicants at the moment and future residents of the proposed scheme. Thank you.
Does that answer your queries, Robin?
Well, yes, Chairman, thank you. It does answer. It's the answer I expected, but it's back to, and I know we're looking at the application as it stands, but I am in the process now of writing letters because I live in a similar situation where our parking is abused, and I'm writing letters on behalf of the management company to try and deal with this, because it is an ongoing thorn in the side of residents that even in private ownership, places like this do get abuse where there is limited parking locally. And I accept what the officer said about a management company operating everything there that's the publicly owned areas, if you like, or the areas owned by the residents. But in practice, it very rarely works effectively. So I'm looking ahead to possible forms of conflict, not only with that, but also I think what's been raised about the access and the narrowness of the road. But maybe that'll come up later in the debate. But thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for that. My next speaker is Alex Brenton.
First, probably a good idea. Hi, my question is, I seem to be fairly convinced that they're going to be rather lovely houses, but I am slightly concerned in terms of the impact on the village of this almost like a closed community courtyard, which you only access if you need, you know, nobody's going to walk past these houses. It's going to be its own little enclave, which has good points and bad points in terms of sort of village community. They all look lovely, having gone through the pictures, etc. But I am concerned that there seems to be, bearing in mind they're knocking buildings down, and therefore in many cases it's going to be a clear ground, that there doesn't appear to be much about sort of more eco-technology in the building of them. Use of stone and old-fashioned slate as such may look lovely. It doesn't necessarily make them terribly efficient modern homes. And I am a bit worried we're going back into a sort of romantic old style Langton Matravers rather than a Langton Matravers for the future. And it is a village that actually has quite a strong green and eco group. So are there any plans for ground source heat pumps? Are there going to be solar panels on the roofs? I mean, this, although the views of the site as you come in the courtyard will be nice, it won't be seen desperately from many other places. So it is an area where one could quite comfortably put solar panels on the roofs of some of the ones that are positioned north-south. You wouldn't see solar panels from the Purbeck Ridge. It would be a very good place to have this as a sort of an example of future planning rather than old styly planning. The one bit I was interested in, and I think, where did I find it? 1540, no, not that one. The water, rainwater collection, and I've got it somewhere. Where it says that the rainwater will go down these hidden gutters, because gutters obviously are not attractive, into a suds area which could be used for irrigation, and that's quite intriguing. But I can't see anything on the plans that indicates where this is particularly, and how that would actually work. It sounds like a lovely intention, but have we got any more details? Thank you.
Good morning,
Kari,
members.
would you like to respond to that, please?
Good morning, members.
Yes.
Liz Adams
Oh,
here. Kari, would you like me to respond, or are you happy to respond?
I was just going to pick up on the last comment about the rainwater going into the SUDs. So originally when the application came in, we had the inclusion of water butts on each of the properties for the collection of rainwater for irrigation. As part of discussions, the applicants removed the water butts and have agreed to, and I think they're just shown here, small areas within each of the private amenity spaces to almost provide a water feature which the rainwater can flow into for use before it then moves into the SUD scheme. So that's where that idea has come from. In terms of the use of solar panels and other renewable energy, whilst this was encouraged by both myself and the design officer at pre-application stage, I think it's fair to say that at the moment, in the absence of a specific policy, it's extremely hard for us to insist on it as part of an application, or likewise to recommend refusal if it's not included. Thank you. I don't know if Liz wanted to add anything.
No, you've covered it, I think. Thanks,
Thanks,
Carrie.
Okay. One of the other issues that was highlighted all the way through by the members of the public was about traffic and highway safety, visibility, and so on. I wonder perhaps Colin Graham from Highways, if you would like to just go over some of those issues for us, please.
Yeah, certainly. Good morning, Madam Chair. Colin Graham, Dorset Council. The old Malthouse Lane is private, and although part of it's obviously in the ownership of the applicant, as is shown with the red line boundary, they do have an established use down there, and I do have to recognise that, and as would appeal inspector, if it went that direction, they would pay weight to that. So it's got a credit there. The houses, some of the newer houses opposite, I think number 3 was talked about, Old Malthouse Lane. There's a lay-by opposite the entrance into the development. That's only shown for 2 parking spaces. So I have seen photographs in one of the representations showing a photograph south where you can see it tapers, and that's not actually a marked space. It's only, I think, 1.7 meters wide at one point, which isn't wide enough to park a car and keep everything clear of the actual Old Malthouse Lane. Likewise, if you come south of that, opposite the existing buildings there is, it shows it is tapered on the plan, perhaps Carrie can point to that, and there's photographs showing vans, etc., being parked in that area, which they shouldn't be. It's not wide enough. If it's been happening, that's historic. Doesn't mean say they've got the right to do it. So the access itself is variable in width. Coming within there, the applicants recognise the existing situation at their entrance where the red pine tree is now, and has recognised that needed to be widened to improve it. There was always, with the school, vehicles were in there. That can be seen on aerial photography, which I've looked at for different years, and that's been improved in its width, and swept path analysis has been done in that area. The pinch point as you come out with the gates, the parked car and the lay-by, if it's in the proper place, off and with off Old Malthouse Lane itself, and not blocking the gateway, you can see to number 3, provides plenty of clear room for a vehicle coming in or out of the access. Yes, I recognise that 2 vehicles can't pass each other side by side at that point, but that's no different to many other private accesses. And we're talking about very low trip generation figures here. I would suspect that for this number of dwellings, there'd be about 10, maybe 11 trips in the peak hour. So it's a sort of one every 6 minutes or so. So very, very low. And if you went into that passing space, you can start to look into the development's lower car park around the back of the houses, and there's passing space at either point within there, so vehicles can, like on country lanes, vehicles can wait and get past each other. It's acting as a shared space. Speeds will be very low. Turning to Old Malthouse Lane, the junction with High Street, that has previously been looked at by my predecessor some years ago as well. And one thing to note is the curb line for the actual access to Old Malthouse Lane is set well back from the actual track line of the highway. This is accentuated by parking that can occur away from the junction. There are zigzags there currently to highlight the junction, and such that, yes, if you were looking at coming out of Old Malthouse Lane and you sat right back in the entrance behind the footway, visibility does seem to be restricted, but you can come forward quite a distance before you're on the track line of passing vehicles. Here's one I prepared earlier, as they say. This is from Collision Explorer. You'll note there are no coloured dots on it because there's no accident history for that location. I've also drawn a blue line from one curb to the other, and that is actually parallel to the centre line of the carriageway. So you can see where the track line would be. Vehicles can still pass vehicles coming the other way. It opens up like a sausage on a string of sausages, and vehicles can pass, and you can see how much of a shadow it's from that blue line to the curb line. It's 1.8 meters, so the vehicle can come out over the footway carefully, seeing pedestrians, and then actually creep out into the edge of carriageway, which is redundant. It's a shadow, and then they will be highly visible because there'll be a lot of car coming out. Perhaps that's why there's no accident history there. That's reflecting that. Thank you, Carrie. The zigzag, the applicant had offered to amend any traffic regulation orders in that location, and I have noticed when I've been out there at school times that cars do park on the zigzags on occasion, one or two. That could be amended, or it's a matter of enforcement. It's certainly not a matter that I can address with the planning law because it's covered by highway law. If there was a requirement to amend the traffic regulation orders, that's got to be at the request of the parish council to the county highway authority.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's something that we can, the local residents can pick up beyond today. It's not something that we can deal with, as you say, it's outside our remit. I have two further speakers. Bill Trite, you wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. But since Colin was responding to what Alex said, and Alex wants to come back, would it not be more logical to take her before me?
You have the floor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go on, Rick. Bill, I'll let Bill speak first.
No, you wanted to come back, Alex, because Colin was responding to you, so it's logical that you go now and I'll follow you.
Through me, please.
With the chairman's permission, of course.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for allowing me to come back. I understand the issue with Malthouse Lane. It is narrow. My instinct is actually there'll probably be less traffic going into this courtyard during the sort of peak hours than there was to the old school when it was there, when you had parents bringing children in quite often. But I am aware that there is quite a lot of issue in the village of Langton Travers about the road, and arguments about whether it needs wider pavements, more pedestrianisation, speed limits. And so I am just flagging up that we may end up spending highways money to mitigate problems that we are causing with planning. That's one of my sort of conundrums. We there's nothing actually wrong with this courtyard development where it is. It is the access in and out and the drawing in of, you know, delivery vehicles and such like to these houses. Particularly now we're in this situation where we have so many white vans turning up with deliveries at odd hours of day and night all day. So I just wonder if we're just giving ourselves another problem further down the line. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Bill.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's instructive that in the agenda I had to wade through, I think it was a very long list of consultees. I made it 17 altogether before I got to the one that I believe that we should be paying greatest attention to, and that was the representations that were made by the parish council. And of course the parish council is the closest representative of the people of Langton Travers. As the parish council says, quoting the NPPF, in rural areas, planning decisions should respond to local circumstances and reflect local needs, unquote. Now, this application doesn't meet those criteria because the real need in Langton is, of course, for affordable housing, and there aren't any in this. Part of the application, admittedly a small part of it, is of course outside the settlement boundary, which is supposed to protect our rapidly diminishing countryside in Dorset. So this should trigger the requirement for affordable housing under the current Purbeck local plan. But again, I notice it doesn't. A major consideration as far as I'm concerned is that of density. It is far too high a density here for an AONB or a conservation area, or indeed any rural location. This is a density of urban proportions, and it is quite unsuitable here. And if we're told, as we were in the introduction, that, and I quote, harm to the conservation area is less than substantial, unquote, then some of us might say that it is worse than that, but we should not be accepting any harm to a conservation area anyway. I would also refer members to points made by the parish council relating to vehicle access, pedestrian safety, and yet more traffic generation, as well as environmental considerations too. We should be attaching far more weight, in my opinion, to the views of an active and very lively parish council that we have in Langton Travers. And it's simply not good enough to refute them by saying things like, without substantiation, so-and-so objection isn't significant, or such and such a proposal is considered acceptable, without, to be honest, giving full reasons or justification for that. So I'm afraid my view here is very much that this proposal needs quite substantial amendment before I, for one, will be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill. I'm going to ask Kim Cow to come in and respond to some of the points you've made, because they are quite strategic and policy level. Kim?
Certainly, members. With regard to the NPPF and the guidance within it, officers follow that guidance. Planning is plan-led. You have local plans that cover the area. And in regard to need within the village, the officer presentation made it very clear about the thresholds for delivery of affordable housing, and that this site in its deliberation and consideration of this site, that those policies are not applicable to the delivery of affordable housing on a brownfield site of this kind, which was previously developed. So in relation to that aspect, we hear what the parish council says, and where applicable, as with Spyway Orchard, a development the members granted recently, where we can, we clearly do request affordable housing provision, but in this instance, as set out in the officer report, those thresholds are not met, and the particular circumstances of this site mean that officers couldn't couldn't request the delivery of affordable housing. And in relation to local circumstances, as I said earlier, we've recognised that, but we have to take each site on its merits. We have to have regard to the local plan policies applicable to the area and the guidance in the NPPF as a whole, which is what has happened here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Can you touch on the comments regarding the conservation area and the substantial weight, please?
Yes, by all means. With regard to the impacts on the conservation area, those were considered in detail. The less than substantial harm is every development will have some impact. The less than substantial harm is the lowest impact within the classifications in the NPPF, and that was the consideration here. We've had regard to the design of the development, the form, the materials, and the relationship with the conservation area and views from within the conservation area into the site, and worked closely with the conservation officer to ensure that the impacts of the development were mitigated. You can see that from the way that the development complements and takes account of the land levels, with Old Malthurst Lane being higher. The development assimilates into the landscape and is considered to have the minimal impact that it could in terms of that classification. And for those reasons, it's acceptable in terms of the impact on the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Bill, does that address your concerns?
It addresses my concerns, but I respectfully have to strongly disagree.
Quite understood. My next speaker is Brian Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. My basic reaction is to agree with most of the points that Councillor Bartlett made at the beginning, that this is acceptable in terms of principle, in terms of the AONB, in terms of design, and after listening carefully to all the stuff about highways, probably highways as well. Like Councillor Brenton, I am disappointed not to see in this application any green features as far as I can see, let alone things like solar panels and so on. I diligently ploughed through the old Purbeck plan, local plan. I can't find anything that requires it, and so I think I have to accept that we can't require it and that the officer's advice on that point is correct. Equally, like Councillor Trite and also the Parish Council, I was disappointed by the ruling in here on affordable housing, but looking at the words in the NPPF, it seems to me that it is quite clear what they mean, that the purpose of them is to encourage development on brownfield sites, and in a sense the controversy about whether these buildings were vacant or abandoned is neither here nor there. The important thing is that is what the motivation of that clause in the NPPF is for, whatever you might think of it. I've got a last disappointment that no one else has mentioned so far, but which was on the Parish Council concerns, which is the second homes disappointment, that there is no provision here to try to ensure that these things do not become, these buildings do not become second homes. Once again, we have a planning legal type argument in the papers, which on the face of it looks to me to be correct. And I mean, I see that later in our agenda we're coming onto that again. But unless anyone else who knows a lot more about what these things mean than me wants to open up that one, on the face of it, it seems to me that we cannot require anything on second homes here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Two things. You talked about renewable energy policy. We did have a press release that was issued on the 28th, so 2 days ago, saying that at Cabinet on the 6th of October, they will be receiving a report
Absolutely.
on the climate and ecological emergency. And one of the actions proposed within that is to produce supplementary planning policy to encourage renewable energy being integrated into all new buildings. As soon as we have that policy, we can then start to insist on all these measures that I know you and Alex and others keep asking for. But everything we do has to have a policy base behind it. And that's where we are with the second homes issue. We have an appeal decision which has sort of blown the policy out of the water at the moment until we've gone through further stages of the Purbeck local plan. But we have every intention of bringing that policy back when we can.
No, I thank you, Chair. But I don't know how far the disquiet with the current situation is reflected by other members of the committee, but I thought I wanted to say that I am not happy with what our current constraints are on both those points.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that respect. No. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and that's Shane Bartlett, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I do share the frustrations of Councillor Heatley as well. I'm sympathetic to the councillors concerning the affordable and social housing this site doesn't bring forward, and also the fact that we don't have a policy in terms of renewable energies and green provision within these development sites. But obviously we are constrained by planning law that comes down from Westminster. And having read through the report and the comments that I made earlier in the debate, I am satisfied that there's no material planning considerations that would warrant refusal for this site, and I'm therefore proposing the recommendations in the report that we grant planning permission subject to conditions as laid out. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Shane. Do I have a seconder, please?
Councillor Dyer speaking. I'm willing to second, Chairman. I appreciate that some of the disappointments are based on real worries, but as you've rightly said, there isn't a policy basis on which you could hang a refusal. And it seems to me that the applicant has taken a lot of notice of the pre-application advice that he or she received, and it's resulted, to my mind, in a reasonably well thought out and refined scheme. So I'm happy to second. The only thing I would add to that is that the bin store is very ingenious, and I think in the circumstances it gives a good answer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I just hope it's got strong enough construction to last underneath. Okay, so we have a proposal to grant that has been duly proposed and seconded, so I will now move to the vote. Just to confirm also that that is as laid out in the officer's report in your agenda at paragraph 17 on page 44. Okay. Yep. Okay, so I will, as I said earlier, I will take the vote by roll call. So first up, Shane Bartlett.
Madam Chairman, I've listened to the debate and understood the officer's report, and I vote for.
Thank you. Alex Brenton.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I have listened to the whole debate. I'm torn on this one, but I think just to state a difference, I am voting against.
Okay, thank you. Robin Cook.
Are you muted, Councillor Cook?
Robin, are you there? Okay, I will come back to Robin in a moment. The next one is Mike Dyer.
Vote to approve, Chairman, and I've listened throughout.
Thank you. Barry Gorringe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's been a very good presentation by the officers today, and I've listened to all the debate, so I'm for the recommendation.
Okay. Brian Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. I too have listened to the debate and read some of the more legalistic bits of the papers, and I'm voting for.
Okay. David Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have listened to the debate and I have read all the papers, and I am voting for.
Thank you. David Took.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened with interest to the debate, the whole of the debate. I'm not entirely delighted by this plan, but excuse me. However, I can see no reason in planning law why we can object to it, so I will vote in favour of it.
Okay, thank you. Bill Trite.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to and participated in the debate, and I'm voting against this recommendation.
Okay, and I will come back to Robin Cook. Are you there?
Yes, I am, Chairman. Apologies for that. I've changed machines. I lost the sound, the mic on one of them, so I'm on another machine. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Loud and clear.
Yep. Right, I listened to the full presentation and all of the debate, and I still have my reservations about the traffic movements and parking, and I admire Colin Graham's optimism. However, I support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, David Northover, can you confirm the outcome of the vote, please?
I can indeed, Chairman. It's 7 for, 2 against.
Okay, in that case, the proposal is carried and permission for this site is granted as per the officer recommendation. Thank you all very much. As I said earlier, unfortunately, because of the way we're holding the meetings virtually and the fact that the public have been notified that the other application that we're deliberating today will start at 2 o'clock, we cannot bring that item forward. So at this point, I will thank everybody for their contribution this morning, and I will close this morning's meeting, and I will see you all again at 2 o'clock for the afternoon session, and there will be a separate meeting invitation for that to join. So thank you all very much. Meeting closed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.